Emma, have you seen the movie Planet of the Apes?
I actually have not.
Well, it's all about this fantasy universe where apes have become super intelligent and they actually enslave humans.
What? How do they have a rationale for how they do it?
Well, truth is, I can't remember what happens in the movie, but there may be a new genetic way that's happening in real life that makes monkeys more intelligent. Not like Planet of the Apes intelligent, but
They're slowly getting there.
this whole video is based off this news story that I read where Chinese scientists have used genetic engineering tools to put human genes inside monkeys. And then the results were that these monkeys became smarter. So we'll get into all the details of that. But first I kind of wanted to talk about why would scientists do this? Why do we do the crazy things we do?
Yeah, for real. Especially, it seems like we always hear about the things that China's willing to do as well.
Yeah, exactly. So what's the point? A lot of people are interested in the concept of intelligence and just in general, like evolutionarily speaking, what separates us from the animals.
Mm-hmm.
So the point of this study was kind of to see, does this gene that they worked on, which is called microcephalin, which I'll explain later, is that involved in human intelligence? We know that humans share like 99.9% of DNA with each other. And with primates, we actually share about 95% of the coding DNA, so that's DNA that will actually make functional product. What these researchers did is they mined that other 5% where we're different, and they tried to come up with some really good candidates for genes that could have to do with intelligence.
Was there a reason they were interested in intelligence specifically?
That's just kind of the thing that this guy is super interested in. He's been studying intelligence for a long time. In fact, he did this huge study with like around 900 individuals where he measured their brain size.
Wow.
And tried to correlate that with intelligence. Although the verdict's still out whether like brain size has anything to do with intelligence, because if you look at other animals, like elephants have bigger brains than us and whales have bigger brains than us, but that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's hard to measure if they're smarter than us.
Yeah.
But we kind of think of ourselves at the top of the intelligence scale, which maybe we shouldn't. And then if you look at the brain size a different way, if you look at it of like brain size to body ratio, because you could argue like whales are huge, of course they have larger brains than us. Well, ants actually have a bigger brain to body ratio than we do. So
there's not really any defining characteristic to say this makes one animal intelligent over another.
Exactly. And even when we look at it within like just considering human beings, there is like a positive correlation, but it's pretty weak. And also, we know that correlation is not necessarily causation.
Right.
So this guy was very interested in intelligence, and it's a huge field. I mean, other people want to know what makes us intelligent, what makes people more intelligent than each other, what makes us more intelligent than animals. This is not the first like study of its kind. A while back, people got really excited about this gene called FOXP2. So this gene encodes a transcription factor, which we talked about these. They're like proteins that regulate the expression of many other genes. So they're like master regulators that are turning on developmental systems. FOXP2 came out as interesting because this gene is really important for language. So they know it's important for language in songbirds, and humans that have mutations in this gene actually have problems with speech and language. So they thought maybe this is it. And on top of that, there were these 2 amino acid changes in humans that aren't, they didn't find in other species.
Wow.
Yeah, so they thought like this could be it.
Yeah,
you know, like
it's really rare to find just one gene that has like such a huge effect on something that someone has.
Exactly. And then when you think about the differences between us and animals, like one of the obvious ones is most of them don't speak. Scientists went back and like performed a follow-up study, and apparently in the first study they only included 20 individuals, which is not a great sample size. Part of it is because I didn't look up what time this study was done, but you know, back in the day, like sequencing is expensive and the price of sequencing has gone way down.
That's true.
So we have the ability to have bigger sample sizes now. But what I think is unforgivable is that the samples didn't include any African Americans.
Oh, that's completely.
So what it was only like European and Asians. So what they found was that this amino acid change is actually more indicative of like migration patterns than
That makes
language.
sense.
Yeah. So
Because they went back and they actually included African Americans in the study and then found it not to be significant.
exactly. So come on, guys, genetic diversity, it's important. But they did, however, find that like FOXP2 is still really important. There's this intronic region where there was a lot of statistical significance between changes in this intron region compared with all groups represented compared to other species.
And introns are really important because they kind of are a place of regulation in the genome. So there's a process called alternative splicing that I actually study where it allows for one gene to code for lots of different proteins and accounts for a lot of the protein diversity that we see in us. And these intronic regions, they don't code for information necessarily, but they can be important places where factors need to bind to help produce the proper protein. So to see changes in an intronic region is actually really interesting because it could have a lot of effects on the regulation and turning on and off of certain genes.
Yeah, especially considering that like that 95% of the coding region of the genome is the same. Like it's not wild to think that a lot of the differences are in the non-coding areas.
Yeah, definitely. So what does FOXP2 have to do with these super smart monkeys?
FOXP2 is just one of the candidates that people have looked at in the past, but this group actually chose to focus on microcephalin. So microcephalin is a good candidate because we know, we've talked about how we might be skeptical of brain size being indicative of intelligence, but microcephalin does seem to control brain size because people that have mutations in this gene can be born with microcephaly, which it means they have a smaller head and a smaller brain. Monkeys also have this microcephalin gene, but it's like regulated a little differently in them. So in humans, it's much more highly expressed during that prenatal development, so when they're still developing in the mother's womb. Whereas in monkeys, it's expressed, but not to as much of high levels. So this could be one important difference that makes our brain bigger. The experiment that they did was they used gene therapy viral vectors, which we've talked about in a different video. It's simply you use viruses to package a gene and deliver it to a certain site. So they used these viral vectors to deliver the microcephalin gene to different monkeys. They were able to get 8 monkeys out of this study. 2 of them actually were miscarried, and one of them like mysteriously died at 76 days.
Wow. So when they're delivering this microcephalin gene, are they able to determine, okay, we want it to go specifically to this place in the genome?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we talked about CRISPR before. That's like the Swiss Army knife. You can tell it, use those guide RNAs to tell it exactly where to go. But when you're using viral vectors, it's kind of a toss-up. So who knows, maybe in those monkeys where they passed away, the gene was like inserted into an important area, like something that's critical for development, and that's why they died. But for the monkeys that lived, they confirmed that the vectors integrated into non-coding regions, which like, that could still, we talked about non-coding regions aren't necessarily doing nothing, it could still be affecting something.
How many copies are they able to deliver? Were they able to measure that?
That's another problem with gene therapy. You can't control how many copies go in, so the copies varied from like 2 to 9, I think. Okay. But it's hard to say, does the number of copies correlate with intelligence, because the sample size is 5 here.
Yeah.
So, monkeys are expensive.
Yeah, they are. But it is, since they are genetically the closest to us, we can still gain a lot of information.
Yeah. So I've already kind of started to get into some of the limitations, but let's talk about what the cool things that they found from this study. They actually found, surprisingly, that the monkeys that had this transgene had smaller brains when they were born, which is opposite you would think. It's supposed to be, making it, when you lose microcephalin, you have a smaller brain, so if you have more, you should have a bigger brain. The monkeys did actually catch up to the control monkeys by 3 years. So it seems like brain development was just kind of slowed down, which is interesting because human brain development we know is very slow, and your brain keeps developing after you're born, like much longer than in monkeys. So that's kind of interesting. And then, for some of the monkeys that like passed away, they took the brain and looked at what genes were expressed, and they found that the brain cells in those transgenic monkeys were less mature than the brain cells in normal monkeys.
So kind of reinforcing the slower development that they're seeing.
Exactly, but at the molecular level.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the most exciting finding from the study was that they did this intelligence test with the monkeys, well, kind of more of a memory test, and the transgenic monkeys performed much better.
Huh.
Yeah, so the test went like this. A monkey's sitting in front of a touchscreen, and they're shown a colored block, just one, and they have to touch the block, and then the screen goes black. And then 2 blocks come up. One is the same color that was on the screen previously,
mm-hmm.
and one is a new color. And the test is like, do you remember the first color, and can you pick the right block? So the monkeys were more accurate, and they were also able to do this faster than the wild type.
That's really impressive, especially considering in a lot of intelligence or memory tests, there's normally like a reward, and in that case, there's not necessarily a reward for picking the right color.
Right, they're just sitting in front of the screen.
Yeah.
There's actually, one of the articles that I cited, there's actually a video you can watch one of the monkeys doing it. It's really cute.
Were there any other limitations from this study that we haven't kind of gone over?
Right, we talked about like sample size. These monkeys were born by C-section, so like, typically if a monkey's born by C-section, or like a human, their brain is smaller already because maybe they didn't go full term, so that could be affecting like the brain size. And I don't think the control monkeys or the normal monkeys were also born by C-section, so that's one difference. Yeah. Another thing is that the expression of microcephalin, I mentioned that it's really high when the monkey is developing in the womb, or when the humans are developing in the womb, but then after you're born, the expression of this gene goes down. But because they did the experiment the way they did with these viral vectors, it was just on all the time, so it never went back down. So who's to say if these monkeys are getting smarter because it was on when they were developing, or because it's also on after they're born? Like maybe they just continue to get smarter.
Yeah, and there's really no way they can test that unless they had a way to like turn on the gene at certain times and then turn it off at other times. Right.
One of the big questions that people have been asking about this study is this ethical? I mean, I don't think this got nearly the slack that the CRISPR babies incident got, because people kind of universally think, like, don't do experiments like that on humans.
Yeah.
But with monkeys, it's a little more gray, maybe. I mean, they're like very intelligent beings, and there's a lot of researchers, like myself included, that probably would not work on monkeys just because they're so similar to us.
Yeah, but I think it is more accepted that you can do these experiments because it's like, okay, if they're so similar, then it makes it easier to like make those generalizations to humans.
Yeah, and the mouse brain is obviously very different from ours, so if you are trying to understand something like intelligence, you might need to upgrade from rodents. Another issue is, okay, if you're making the monkeys smarter and more human-like, does that change the way we have to do experiments with them? There are a lot of guidelines that we have to follow in the lab whenever we do experiments with vertebrate animals. We have to literally write up protocols about exactly how we will handle them and exactly what we will do and how they feel pain. So does that change if they're becoming more intelligent, more like emotionally intelligent?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's something that I feel like you wouldn't really know until, I don't know, something adverse happens, and then you realize, oh, they actually sense a lot more than we realize.
But still, a really interesting study, and I think the researcher is planning to just keep doing more candidate genes and making more smart monkeys. Planet of the Apes, here we come.